Great. Was that you, Jessica, who just hit the recording?
Yes. Is that
Excellent.
okay?
Yeah, no, that's great. So you may end up being the holder of it, but we'll see if it comes to me. So, all right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining for today's Lunch and Learn. We are pretty well versed at this point in Zoom world and kind of etiquette, but just as a couple of friendly reminders, please make sure to keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. And Stephanie and Cecily, who will be presenting today, are both comfortable with having questions asked as we go through the presentation. So please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask Stephanie directly or drop a question into the chat. Before jumping into the presentation, I want to just kind of offer a few things. Today, we have two special guests, and I'm really excited about having both Stephanie Gutierrez and Cecily Engelhardt. Stephanie is the co-founder of Hope Nation Consulting, LLC, which is a firm that provides strategic guidance to organizations that work in Indigenous and rural communities. And she is the author of a piece that was done with the Democracy Collaborative on Indigenous Approaches to Community Wealth Building, a Lakota Translation, among other things. And her colleague today, Cecily Engelhardt, is the Indigenous Community Wealth Building Coordinator with Hope Nation, LLC, and also the advancement director of a new nonprofit called Seven Fires. Briefly, I reached out to Stephanie maybe a few months ago, and just as a background, I had come across her work, the work that she had done with the Democracy Collaborative. I had been following some community wealth building strategies and was really interested in what the Democracy Collaborative was doing within community wealth building and community economic development. And when I had reached out to Stephanie, it was really just a kind of a meeting to hear a little bit more and learn more about her work. And the hope was to invite her to a session such as this, where she could share the work that she had been doing in hopes that we can sort of use it as a spark and a way to start thinking about some of the things that we're doing across the state. And to my delight, she agreed to participate. And so today she is here with Cecily. So, and it looks like we have about 22 people on the call. And just so folks can so she can get to know who's on the call, if you would drop your name and your position and where you're located, so we kind of get an idea, you can drop it in the chat. That would be really great. And then we can kind of see who's on the call. Today, Stephanie and Cecily will be discussing about a project called We Are the Economy, the Transformative Practice of building community wealth in rural and native communities, and will help lead a conversation later through inclusive economic development and building community wealth. So with that, I will turn it over to today's presenter. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'm excited to be here. Cecily is just joining us. She's coming from another appointment. Cecily, are you on? Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Great. Cecily is my right-hand man and right-hand woman who's helping me move this through. Cecily, are you able to bring up the slides? That way I can free myself up. If not, no worries.
I apologize. I'm literally just getting back in at my house physically.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't, if you can send me the link or the file.
You're good. You're good. I'll do it. No worries. I apologize. We're both moving in different directions so much. But thank you, Cecily. And you can just keep an eye out on the chat for me. That would be great as people generate questions or have thoughts.
Will do.
Thank you. We're excited because we really want to share with you some work that started 5 years ago for me that's grounded in, building local economies through a cultural context and the realities of those communities. My first question, I want to see your response in the chat, is how old were you when you first realized you were part of an economy? And I can't see my chat. Great. 6, 8, 10, 7. Wow, that's awesome. I'm not sure. Too old. That's how I feel. High school? Okay. Um, I always tell people often in the communities that we work with when I got a job, yeah, often in when we're working in our communities, they're rural and they're tribal. There's high poverty levels. There's a lot of trauma, and I can tell you from my own experience that I think Tessa, my first econ class, yeah, it wasn't until I was in grad school in my 40s, really, that I really understood my role in an economy, that I had a role, that I had a play in it. Um, I always saw it as a big, scary word. And so our work is really focused on helping people realize their role in the economy and that they have a role and that they have the ability to shift and make change in the economy, regardless of what's going on politically or systemically. So, what is community wealth building? Community wealth building is a systems approach to economic development. It was started out by the Democracy Collaborative, and it's rooted in locally owned and broadly held ownership. And there are key facets of this approach. So it's really about promoting broader ownership, anchoring jobs locally, stopping leakage from dollars leaving the community, stopping our employment from leaving the community, supporting individual and family wealth building, reinforcing stewardship, generating revenue to finance public services, and leveraging anchor institutions to contribute. This new approach puts people and community first, and it focuses on creating broadly held wealth. That is the overview. Community wealth building, Democracy Collaborative really spent a lot of time on building the approach. And in the approach are 7 drivers. And the 7 drivers work together. They create a system that delivers the outcomes that are sought, which is an inclusive, sustainable economy where everyone can prosper, including those unemployable. As you can see, the 7 drivers, these are really like the hallmark places that we look at for moving money, shifting the economy within, pulling in new businesses and ways that government and local institutions can play a role in that. There's a great book put out by Democracy Collaborative, Cities Building Community Wealth. It's a yellow book, I call it, and we'll share that link in the chat. I highly recommend reading this. This is the book that really started my knowledge, and I read it so many times. I'd say 6 times before I actually went, I get it. Not because it's hard, but because I was coming from a Lakota lens. I am Oglala Lakota. I'm enrolled with the tribe. My mother was from the reservation in Pine Ridge, and that's how I identify. And this work started when I worked for Thunder Valley CDC out of Pine Ridge, and it's now become sort of a hallmark or an example of the change that can happen using this framework. Democracy Collaborative chose to work with 5 Native communities across the country to really help the organizations understand what this framework was about, how they could build and foster ownership, increase their local assets, and anchor those jobs locally. The organizations were Thunder Valley CDC, like I said, in Pine Ridge, Native American Natural Foods. I don't know if you're familiar with Tonka bars. They're the producers of Tonka bars. The Spokane Tribe of Indians out of Washington, Little Earth of United Tribes in Minnesota, and NAYA in Portland, Native American Youth and Family Center. And then, yeah, and that was it. And they brought us together over 5 years. I didn't come into the project until the fifth year. And so I had to catch up. I had to understand what everybody was talking about and doing. And they took the group around to different Evergreen Cooperative, which is out of Cleveland, which is sort of like Democracy Collaborative's hallmark community that really took this work and implemented it at a deeper level. But they showed us, took us around to different cooperatives. As you can see in here was a food cooperative that was built. And then we really at Thunder Valley really delved into this concept, and Thunder Valley actually took it on as part of their framework. One of the, I think the greatest outcomes at Thunder Valley was the housing situation and their focus on housing. And that's sort of how it started its roots. The cohort came together over 5 years, and they developed and implemented strategies to grow and foster local enterprises of various forms across each of their communities. There were many important outcomes and lessons learned from this process. But as Sarah says, the most powerful learning was coming together to shift mindsets and to think through what a truly sustainable community wealth building strategy looks like when it's grounded in the values of the community. It truly is value-based. It's about what is important to that community. And we come at it through a tribal lens, but I live in a very rural area, and there are so many similarities in some sense, even around culture, especially around culture. I live in New Haven, Missouri, which is an hour and a half out of St. Louis. And we're a small farm community, population 1,006 or something. But we have a very high German population. This is where they settled along the Missouri River back in the mid 1800s. And they've built a growing wine industry here. And when I talk culture, the ears perk up. It's like, I can relate to this. I can understand this. Sometimes they get a little, they're like, wait, how does this apply indigenous to German ways? But it's about culture. It's about values. It's about our principles that we were taught and raised up on. These are just some of the pictures of our community gatherings and learnings, and it was an extraordinary experience. The transformative practice of reclaiming ourselves and our relationships, that is really, to me, how we engage with members of a community when we're building community wealth. We talk about, like the question I asked you, when did you first know that you were part of an economy? And some still don't think they are. They don't see themselves in an economy because their choices or their decisions don't match what's going on. And the word economy is scary. This is my sister, my friend Ray, and her and I were in charge of the social enterprise program at Thunder Valley. And Ray, was a high school graduate, and we were charged with building social enterprises, and at the same time understanding community wealth. And we had to take some steps backwards in order to get to this place of what our economy could look like. But first we had to understand what it was now. Often when people think about economy, they think that it's something that the people in power manage. They create the economy. But in all reality, we are the economy. We create it with the choices, with our assets, and what we place value in. The word economy derives from the Greek word household management, but it starts with our own homes, our own management. Like I said, my journey began as the social enterprise manager, and I was right before I started there, was completing my master's in social work, and I steered away from economic development. It scared me. I didn't know. I didn't think I had the the knowledge or the strength or the wisdom to be able to do it. And here I am today. All my work is focused on economic development. And like I said, I was introduced there to the concepts. Ray and I spent a lot of time reading over the materials, and we began to notice in the margins, we would scribble our notes about how these concepts related to our own Lakota beliefs and our traditional ways of being long before colonization. And I was empowered by the revelation that our ways were visible in this work. And I think that's what really, I took um, a personal journey with this work. I formed a relationship with this work. There were so many common words to describe the work that not only made sense to our, when I reflected on our tribal values, but my own personal values of economy and what I want to see in our communities. I basically took responsibility in a sense as well to my own role in the economy, where I was spending my money, where I was working, how I was contributing, how I wasn't contributing. Um, while we were there, we spent a lot of time reflecting on the drivers, and we spoke with staff. This is where I really talk about community. This is where it's really important in our work to spend time in the community, be there personally, talk with staff, relatives, community members through informal interviews, casual conversations. And sometimes it was really hard and it was sad. And there were moments where we cried because we realized how much had changed, um, in the way that we spend money, the way we trade, the way we operate our communities. It wasn't, it didn't match with our values. And we can say that some of that was put upon us by policy, by practices that took place during historical times in our lives. But we also understood, because our director really understood, that we also have to take responsibility. So we know that happened, but now what are we going to do about it? And to me, community wealth building is a place where people can do that. They can find their way in it, and they can find it through any role in their community. They could be a mid-level staff member at a local community college. They have a role in the economy, and they can shape it, and they have the power to shift even within that community college, their role in the economy. Um, for Lakota, wealth means to live by our virtues in order to have a happy and well-balanced life. It's not materialistic things, but helping, giving, taking care of each other. Our wealth is measured by our ability to care for our people and to provide a strong foundation for the future. Um, Community wealth building strategies, if this is an option that you are considering, I firmly believe that it should be translated according to the community and what they hold value in, and integrating their practices and creating ways of inclusivity and participation in the process. And there's plenty of places for that to happen, and I'll share that with you. In our work, we are decolonizing the approach. We're reclaiming the way we managed our economies long ago. The drivers. So Democracy Collaborative does a great job of showing how each of these drivers in a traditional approach, we call it traditional in the sense, I should change that to mainstream. This is what mainstream says about place. Mainstream's approach right now is to attract firms using incentives, which increases the tax burden on local residents. Great example is Boeing up in Washington, bartering with the community. Give us a lower tax base and we'll stay. And putting that back on the people and threatening the people. Community wealth building looks at it differently. It's about developing those underutilized local assets of many kinds to benefit the local residents. And in a Lakota way, We see place as it's a loyalty to the people, the planet, the capital, and the land. And so when we're making decisions about what should be built, we take into consideration all of those things in our decisions. Another one, let's pick, yeah, ownership. You see a lot in our communities. I see it in our own community here of 1,000 people, absentee landowners living in other states, not controlling their rentals, creating havens for uh, uh, drug dealing. Really, we have a huge problem with that in our community. Um, they're not present, and they don't have anyone present who can take claim in those and be responsible for their own position in this community. Community wealth building talks about promoting local broad-based ownership, and so this is also where we get into really looking at cooperatives as a model, ESOPs as a model. And in Lakota, we say ownership is held by the Oyate, the whole. It's about democratization of ownership. And I know that other cultures feel that way too. Even here, this is their home. To them, this is the land that they've built their families on. And although we know these lands originally belonged to the Osage, um, they have a stake in that soil, and so getting them to realize that their ownership can go even broader is a benefit. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through all of them, and we'll definitely share the slides with you at the end. um, Things we've learned through the process. For us, decolonizing the concepts, um, we have the power, the strength, and the intelligence to develop culturally specific strategies for health, well-being, and where our money is moving. Um, we have the right, all communities have the right to accept new ways of thinking, to challenge them, to reconstruct them, or deny them. That's decolonization. Um, we also recognize and include culture, as I said, for several reasons. We make it a communal process. We build collaboratives. So a collective, pardon me. Our plan in Pine Ridge was to build a collective of business owners, stakeholders like governments, the tribal government leadership, hospitals, schools, bringing all of them together to talk about how to build the economy, not just the wealthiest in the community or the ones with the most businesses. Engage through storytelling, learning about, translating that knowledge and that wisdom that people have to share through history, preserving culture and teaching lessons. To me, it's the best approach for gathering to obtain a lot of information. It takes patience, it takes time, it takes money. Our push right now with funders is to get them to invest in that relationship building process. The other thing that really came out of this work was that many communities, I see time and time again, do not have a solid baseline. I'm not sure. In Indian country, we call them SEDS reports, Community Economic Development Reports. A lot of times that information, people are in a haste to get it back to the government to get their money to approve off on it. And that information is based on statistics, what they can find on Google. It doesn't include everything. It doesn't include the social conditions of the community. It doesn't include the even a deep understanding of the financial. Um, those studies can be so short and so limiting. And we go through a process of creating community baselines that are extremely thorough, that cover all of that and involve everyone in that process. The last thing that I say is share this knowledge, like get this out, constantly communicate back what you've learned. A really interesting process that we do is mapping. And these are really messy drawings. But we sit with, and this was an hour, 45 minutes worth of work with some communities. And we talked about mainstream economy. We really talked about like what's actually happening in our community. Um, we talked about the IKEA coming in. This was with NAIA in Portland, and they were building an IKEA. Where are those dollars going? They're going back out. Um, the Walmarts employ part-time, low wages, no benefits. Trader Joe's the same. And decision makers, and it's about power and politics. It doesn't represent the whole community. It doesn't represent the people who are really about making the difference. Um, we talked about the loan rates and just everything. And then we say, okay, now let's look at it from a community wealth building lens. Let's start with, place. Let's start with who we are, who are our values, what's important to us. And we draw. We're very visual. And so visual helps people to understand. And they're feeding the information and we're drawing it, or, whatever way you can collect that information is super helpful. And that's just a start. That just gets people's wheels spinning. We do more intense mapping as well, and that's something that we're going to really, I'll talk about that at the end a little bit more. Strategies. There are many different strategies for how to make this work. Anchor procurement. So bring someone from the locally rooted nonprofit institutions, hospitals, universities, governments to the table, to this collective, to discuss consciously directing resources that drive equitable development. While I was at Pine Ridge, several of the people who worked with us had worked for the tribe. And what we found out was, the tribe has 12 different programs. Every single different program was going to buy their office supplies on their own. There was no consolidated purchasing. And the budgets were astronomical, what they were spending. And one person said, "Oh my gosh, you mean I could open an office supply store and I could funnel that together. I could bridge it and pull it in and make some money, make a profit, as well as reducing the expense to the tribe." Yes, great example. Another one, enterprise development. We built, we started a quilting cooperative. Arts and culture plays a big role in our communities. We have many quilters, but the local, the woman who was selling the most quilts and making the most money, at the tune of close to $1 million a year, was a non-native woman in the surrounding community, who had access to website, and she was employing people all over the country to build those Lakota quilts and sell them. We decided, we have so many valuable artists, we have so many talented people. We wanted to help do that. We wanted to help them come together, and we brought together 7 women who were all brilliant quilters, and to create a quilting cooperative. I can talk to you more. That would be phase 2, about the outcomes of that and what we learned through that process. Ecological resilience. Pair workforce with ecological goals to promote energy efficiency. At Thunder Valley, the housing that was built was all built green. The workforce development group, young Lakota people between the age of 18 and 24 were in that program, and they were learning construction skills. They also learned about green, or about solar panels. And now there is one member who is working across the country putting in solar. There's another one who has created his own construction business on site on the reservation, who's actually helping to finish build some of those houses within the community. Financing, partner with CDFIs. We did a lot of work with CDFIs, foundations, impact investors, create loan funds and make equity investments and introduce responsible banking ordinances. Land use and real estate, partner with others, city governments, support equitable land development through urban gardens, community land trusts, and land banks. One of our ideas was we have a lot of land. That's one of our greatest assets. But we also have a lot of artists who work out of their cars when they sell, and they sell at gas stations. And our thought was, why doesn't the tribe create a parking lot that's lit, that has lighting, that's safe, that may have warmers in the winter, so that people can sell at those pivotal corners of transportation across the tribe. Workforce. Cities consciously link workforce development efforts to employers, especially for the unemployable. I want to go back to one example under enterprise development. Another example, and ecological resilience. We created a regenerative farming, a farm at Thunder Valley. And one of the things that we did was partner with Head Start. And Head Start has to feed the children. And so we donated eggs and chicken to the Head Start program, which saved the Head Start program money. There's all these different ways that things can happen. And I think when people get creative and have the ability to sit down and map it out and hear from different members, there's just so much more color and more depth to the conversation. So Cecily and I have taken on the role of, we plan to move the community wealth building work we're doing out of the nonprofit. We realize that we can't put the onus and the burden of finding the funding to do this work on low income communities. And so we are creating, we've created a nonprofit that's addressing this through two different programs. One, we're creating curriculum and design around Indigenous community wealth building. So we will provide on the ground real solutions going into communities and helping them through the process, that mapping process, the baseline process, and then moving forward, helping them find impact investors, working with local government to create community agreements, community benefit agreements. The second program we're creating is an Indigenous Women's Fellowship. It's going to provide an in-depth personal and professional growth opportunity for Indigenous women to nurture their well-being, cultivate their leadership, and amplify their entrepreneurial spirit. The reason for this is in our communities, women are the breadwinners and they are the spenders. And they hold a huge role and they provide a lot of value, but they don't often have the say. They don't have the ability to make decisions. We want to empower them, especially women who've come out of trauma, who are out of crisis, who have a home, have a car, have a job, and who can make change wherever they're at, like I said, in any position they're at. So we are really using that fellowship as a way to provide coaching and transformational work to empower them. And we believe that doing that mirrored with the community wealth building concept will lead to stronger roles for our women to play in the economy. Some of the, I love sharing visuals, and we're looking at it from a very holistic human way. This is, our designer is creating our branding now. And this is just a beautiful reflection of what he heard from us and how he saw this work playing out. And these are, you can see the 7 drivers in here and how they're a part of the whole. We're a living ecosystem. And the best visual is to explain that through the body, through humans. And here's the other one. We're trying to make our visuals so that they're appealing across all cultures. but each of these is an identifier for those drivers. So let's see where, hold on. Pardon me. Yeah, and here's a great example of, the before, sort of sickness, a leaky economy where things are leaving and they're not visible. Jobs, people, I think 65% of the people on Pine Ridge leave the community for a job. They spend their money outside of that community. Yet non-tribal members non-members hold 65, or no, non-members hold a majority of the jobs on the reservation. So there's this backwards thing going on, which is evident in rural communities as well. And then here's an image of healing, unified, working together. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to take a break and open it up for questions or thoughts or ideas. I'm going to stop sharing and view large so I can see all of you.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And I'll pause for a second as well and see if there are questions that folks have or comments they would like to make.
Hi, Stephanie. My name's Lissa. I'm up in northern Wisconsin. This is such an inspirational story. I'm so glad I got to catch you today. Can you've just described some extraordinary accomplishments in lots of different areas. Can you kind of give us a background on your time frame? I mean, how long did it take to start the relationship building and then move into actual new developments?
I can tell you from examples, for instance, like NAYA in Portland. NAYA was one of the members of the Learning Action Lab for 5 years. They didn't actually start incorporating, and that's primarily because Democracy Collaborative hadn't approached it from a values perspective yet. They hadn't done that process. When I came in, that process came about through my translation, through our translation, and from there, it took Spokane about 2 years to really create not only staff that were knowledgeable, but the communities that they were working with. And now it's been 4 years and it's part of their whole programming. It's a part of all of it. They've actually done some remarkable work in the, I can't remember the name of the community, Cecily.
I can't either at the moment. Was it the Tully
neighborhood.
neighborhood?
Yeah, in which was Portland was a relocation city, so there was a high population of natives in that area, and it suffered because large corporations came in around them, took a lot of the local economies. They're building that back, and their focus has started with housing. So that's one of the things I wanted to share was everyone starts somewhere, wherever their strengths are. I think the relationship building piece is the most important. If you can build a solid foundation in the beginning and do some of that, which we plan to do is bring more of that curriculum. I see that taking place over, depending on the community and depending on where they're at in their resistance and in their, there's a lot of factors, but that's 3 to 6 months. And just to get to the stage where you have a map and where you have a thorough understanding of your community and what's possible. And then from there, for us and tribal communities, we have a lot of policy that needs to happen, tribal codes that need to be written. Having an attorney at the table is very important. And that's that can be going on at the same time as opportunities. The quilting collaborative was not successful. I will share that with you. And the reason it wasn't was I left as they were just developing and they were just getting going. We had an outsider who came in and still didn't understand community wealth building and didn't understand the impact that trauma has in our communities. And that trauma also has, which I see across any community, members who don't feel like, who've been dependent on the government, who have been dependent on outsiders coming in to tell them what to do, they froze. They could not understand cooperative development in the sense that they own it, they manage it, they get to dictate it the way they want. They were waiting for someone to come tell them what to do. And it's not closed as of yet, it's on hold. And I think it's waiting for the right person to move them back into that. But there's a lot of learning lessons through this process. Things that we still don't realize the impact that the mainstream economy is still having at that level, even on our ability to manage. Now there's Spokane has done remarkable work around their green, solar, bio. I'm terrible, you guys, with environmental stuff, but they've done a remarkable job, and that's taken them 10 years to incorporated it. They even building a local market that feeds the employees to those businesses and those operations. Yeah, it's a long-term process. Like we say, it took us a long time to get here. It's going to take us a long time to move out of it. But I see so many strengths within small communities that we can work from. We can vamp out of from there. I hope that's helpful.
Other questions?
What kind of resistance do you run into, especially if you're more institutional partners or collaborators, that, you know, this isn't how things really work? And you know, I imagine just our individual mindsets are the first challenge. You talk about the relationship building to get beyond that, but then, yeah, just like, I'm amazed at who, you know, buys their office supplies and they get delivered via Amazon. You know, just like, so how do you deal with that more institutional level of, this just doesn't make sense, this isn't how we operate?
Mm-hmm.
That's not how the world works, as
Yeah.
if there's one way the world can work.
And I think, you know, I had someone who in our community in Pine Ridge who worked for the hospital, and you know, she was like, "What do you do? What are you doing?" You know, she was a relative, and I was explaining to her, and I said, for the hospital, for example, you know, you have to buy supplies, you have to buy food. Where do you get your food? Like right now, all food is bought from a distributor out of Iowa. Um, Imagine if you bought your fresh fruit or your fresh vegetables from the regenerative farm. I was like, that's even just probably 1% of the budget that's spent in the hospital. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, you mean?" And I was like, probably not even 1%, probably, you know, 0.25% of what, you know, food could be bought locally. And she was like, you know, I couldn't see our hospital administrator doing that. You know, he's a government worker and he's from outside. And, you know, and my thought is, so what if we helped you to design that or to frame that and pitch it to them? You know, I don't think so. I think that collective that you build is really important, to have the right people at the table. If there's someone who is truly, bent on the mainstream economy and how it benefits them, they're probably not going to be good for the collective. It doesn't mean that you can't create change over time with that group or that organization, but many of them want to see what they're going to save, what am I going to get out of this? And still that it's not communal, it's individual. But I think it's all in finding the right people who can create that change. Like I talk about the mid-level manager in the tribal college. That's how it worked for Head Start. It's how they got Head Start, was someone within seeing, we've got to buy these things for the kids. Why wouldn't we buy local? And we were producing so many eggs, we couldn't get rid of them. We were giving them away. So I hope that's helpful. It's not going to be without a fight.
Well, it just seems to me that it's very, extension is built, I don't know what it will be in the future, but we understand its relationships. And it's people being in their county, hopefully for years, to develop trust in those relationships. And that's a little harder these days as there's more mobility and less money to keep people in one place. But it seems to me, and there are people here that have greater extension wisdom than I do, that this approach is a natural fit. And yeah.
I think it's interesting too. It'll be really interesting to see how the shift that a lot of, in our community, we have retirees moving to rural communities and wanting to take leadership roles. And that generation also comes with some strong movement building in them innately. And I'm excited to see what happens even here in our community, what role they take and how the locals respond. It's going to be, I mean, we're having conversations here, putting people in the same room. And really, sometimes really difficult conversations, but I keep having them. Like my aunt used to say to me growing up, arguing is good, fighting is not. We can argue, but we can't fight.
Well, I've had a conversation with a few folks on the call about kind of why some of these things are difficult. And I think this is to your point, Miles, about why certain strategies they're like dead on arrival when you bring it to the attention of certain stakeholders within the community. And even over the last 20 years, I mean, some of these things have changed. So for instance, energy efficiency as a point of conversation and alternative strategies for energy, for instance, are becoming much more mainstream because they're cost, effective, and there's tried and true examples of people doing it within communities and then actually reaping the benefits of moving not only for the economy but also for savings and then also for the environment. Anchor institution development is another example of, there was this big movement with these large anchor institutions to go and find the cheapest product because that was what the bottom line was sort of driving, and they had thin margins to be able to kind of operate within. And now you start to see some of these like tribal colleges, local universities, hospitals, and so forth that are actually investing because they realize that quality of place is important. And in order to increase quality of place and quality of life, you need to actually have people that will stay and you need to have jobs. So this multiplier effect. And again, there are examples of, place-based nonprofits that are actually engaging in anchor institution strategies. And I think it's kind of like part of the poll is that it seems there isn't evidence about, that this is an effective strategy, but there has been over time examples of this becoming effective and examples. And there's research that's being conducted that is sort of demonstrating the power of doing these things. Doesn't mean it's going to be overcome. And, I hear you loud and clear out of Oneida County. It can be difficult to have these conversations like many of our colleagues across the state. But I think that may be part of the issue. Some of these ideas are new, and it's much easier to go back to the status quo as the conversation, because we don't have evidence, we don't have data, we don't have, I don't want to necessarily be the first person to jump out on this one. I think it's more complex than that to be able to do, but I suspect that some of these things will become, and you can actually see some of them, even financing as an example, how banks and local community banks and CDFIs are engaging with lending practices, whether it's homeowners or businesses or individuals and so forth. So I think it's sort of a process, and it takes time, similar to relationship building, before we'll see any sort of switch on it.
Well, I see Tessa, Matt, and Daniel are listening in on this, and their brains have the machinery to get at that sort of information and feed it to us. So I'm looking forward to more lunch and learns.
The Democracy Collaborative, we've had some really good conversations with them. Sarah and I this week just spoke, and as we develop our nonprofit, we are very much including evaluation in our process. We want that research. I'm a graduate of Washington University, and one of my professors is helping to develop our programming, and she's putting those evaluation measures in there, because that's the one thing that Democracy Collaborative, they've done research, but it's nothing, it's not evidence-based in a sense. And so they're revamping and they're shifting to that, because that's what funders want. But also because we want to be able to show our communities, this is what can be done, this is what's possible. So we are going to be sharing that information out as we develop this nonprofit. And we're hoping to take on 2 pilot projects next year, January. And after 1 year, being able to share out what we find just in that 1 year, depending on the state we're in.
I think what's important here is, qualitative evaluation is just as scientific as quantitative evaluation. And if basing your community-based wealth on community values is essential to the work, then part of what you have to measure is how have the changes impacted the values? Are they supporting them, strengthening them? And it's doable, it's just challenging. Different way of thinking about things, because mainstream economics is, all about how many jobs. I created this many jobs, and you're like, well, no, you didn't. That just sort of happened. But yours is much more nuanced.
And
it's very exciting.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. And we're happy to sit with anyone, talk through it. If there's a community you're working with that you want some input on, or ideas, or just to listen, we are really trying to think through those measurements, Patricia, and hearing from them about how to measure that, not just us. So I see a few comments out here. One about the role of debit is in community wealth building, and if how this sort of model overlaps with others, like economics of shared abundance. There are so many that we hear community wealth building a lot, but it's not in the framework that Democracy Collaborative has built. The word is thrown around a lot. I mean, it's the hot word, and then restorative economy, there's all different. I think they're all about the same thing. It's your approach and where you're coming from, who you're working with. The Indigenous approach is going at it a different way. I don't know. I didn't even hear. I haven't heard of economics of shared abundance. I wish I had more to.
I mean, I'll jump in really, really fast here. Just in thinking about like the what propels, or what the idea of scarcity being a main propeller of our like contemporary economics, if you will. And I think with the drivers, when I think about community wealth building, especially Indigenous community wealth building, the like peeling back a little bit of all of the things we consider to be normalized functions of daily life. I think, you know, we know plenty of people who exist very much outside of or peripherally to the kind of dominant economic models, I think, especially in Indigenous communities where you still have people who hunt and forage and do this kind of mixed existence. And I think that when we're thinking about, I guess I don't fully deeply know the model of shared abundance economics, but I think it also comes from this idea of like, how are we valuing the way in which we think about things like ownership or relationship, stewardship, all of those components then really, really deeply inform how we are operating within our local economic system, and then how those relate to other economic systems. I don't know if that's a very good way of answering your question, but there's so much mindset stuff embedded in all of this. You know, that relationship building that we talked about earlier, it's also that relationship with self to economy in a really big way.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am also not not initially attracted to economics, and I think it is because of, you know, how are we coming at it? And so the piece that I was hearing about shared abundance was coming out of the a Black community's experience. So I shared that link, and just and the whole point of debt, like I'd wonder, in an Indigenous community, did you ever have debt? I've heard of reciprocity, but not, you know, we you know, here in this, yeah, just not a fan of the debt economy.
And I do, I like to kind of stick to the timeline that is set out, because I know people have lots of meetings and so forth. We are at 1 o'clock. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to break free. And if we were all in a room, you would hear us clapping for you all. So can show appreciation to our guests who came in today. Thank you both for joining us. And I'm actually going to stop. I don't know if you have just a minute, Stephanie and Cecily, to stick around. Otherwise, you know, you're free to jump off, but can stay on for like another minute. That would be awesome. Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, stay in touch with us. We'd love to hear what you're doing, and any creative ways, or read the books. I love them.